Are faith and reason in conflict? Very often there's this assumption that if you're a person of science or a person of reason, there is no scope for faith within that system. Now, that could be wrong. For instance, the number of atheists who have got a Nobel Prize for subjects like physics is just 4.7. For economics, it's just 5.2. Chemistry, it's just 7.1. Maybe physiology, medicine, again, 8.9%. And this is a very small number of people who have won the Nobel Prize who claim to be atheists. Now, this does not prove that theism is right. Just because very few atheists have won the Nobel Prize. But all that I'm trying to say is it's a myth to assume that if you are a person of science or a person of faith, the likelihood of you being scientifically inclined or a person of reason is very less. In fact, at least from this Nobel Prize studies, it shows that quite a few of them, a significant majority of them, are actually people who believe. So when you say someone is a person who holds on to reason, and as a result of that, there is no scope for faith, what does that mean? Usually it means these four things. That a person of reason is someone who methodologically inquires about everything. For instance, morality, aesthetics, and religion. There is the only way to come to conclusions about morality or religion is not through faith, but through reason. And for instance, Immanuel Kant was one such thinker who attempted to do that, who came up with a hypothetical imperative, categorical imperative, and in every moral situation, you're meant to ask a series of questions. And if those questions are answered in a particular way, and if it can be universally applied, then that moral behavior becomes right. So within that framework, Kant said you don't need religion, all that you need is reason, and that's more than enough. The second thing that normally people who claim to be reasonable or purely reasonable would say that they always follow logical inference. For example, a very reasonable thing, if you see smoke, you would assume that there is fire. So there's always a logical inference. The third thing that they would argue is they would say something is true only if it can be demonstrated. And once a claim is demonstrated or a proposition is demonstrated, then it will be justified and true. And if that doesn't happen, then that claim is false. So under this category, then, that would mean that miracles are not demonstrable because you cannot repeat a miracle. And hence, people of faith normally would believe in some miracle or the other. And here, there is no room for that. And the fourth thing is they would argue that they always will personally verify if something is true or false. It's not based on hearsay. And to a large extent here, religion is based on hearsay. Hence, for a reasonable person, this cannot be accepted unless they can personally verify what is being told. Now, is that the case though? Do all reasonable people follow these four principles? Not always. Not all rational people have the time to morally work out the categorical or hypothetical imperative that Kant suggested in every moral situation. Very often, our moral behavior is based on several external factors when we make certain moral decisions. The second thing is not all reasonable people always use methodological inquiry for everything. For instance, the chair that I'm sitting on, perhaps the chair that you're sitting on, you did not use methodological inquiry before you sat on that chair. Or every time we use a flyover or a bridge, we don't use methodological inquiry. We just trust that the bridge has been built well, or the chair that I'm sitting on is capable of handling my weight. And also, not all people personally go and verify if what scientists say is true or false. Very often we just believe them. If they have something to say about our brain, we just believe that what they're saying is true. We trust it based on hearsay. Even scientists, for that matter, to a large extent, trust one another's findings. A scientist, however, he normally would just believe the results of his colleagues and use those results in his own experiments. So even scientists actually trust one another's findings and use those findings to get on with their own projects. And for example, the other thing is scientists too trust their minds are not the result of random chemical fluctuations, but believe that it is capable of ordering things in a certain way. Evolution might be able to explain why we think in a certain way. For example, survival instinct could be one way in which evolution explains why we behave in a certain way, but it cannot explain why we value truth. Now, that's a very interesting thing. Evolution cannot explain why truth, as humans, we place such a high value on truth. Now, the final thing is people also just assume, scientists also base a lot of their experiments on assumptions. For instance, how did life enter the system? We still don't know how life entered the system. But just because they don't understand or know how it entered, they don't stop believing in life. They assume that life has somehow entered the system, and based on that assumption, so much of evolution has actually evolved. And so the idea that somehow reason displaces faith might be misplaced. As I said earlier, there are so many, a significant majority of Nobel Prize winners are believers. But again, that doesn't mean that belief becomes true. It just questions that the idea that if you're scientifically inclined, there is no scope for faith. It questions that. The second thing is, not all reasonable people follow those 4 principles that I said. They very often operate on the basis of belief and trust. And so I don't think that reason displaces faith. In my second video, we're going to talk about what is faith.